Hello, Captains, and welcome back to our chat. This is Mission Debrief, where we're rewinding the warp drive to take a second and look at the episode of Star Trek Strange New Worlds. I'm in a full rewatch mode while I wait word from the stars, aka Season 3, and I'm using this time to slow down and scan deeper. Now, if you're enjoying this journey across time and Trek, please don't forget to like, subscribe, and share the show. Your support keeps this healing frequency open, and it really helps bring more voices into the conversation. Today, I'll be diving into Season 1, Episode 3, Ghosts of Illyria. That was originally aired on May 19th, 2022. This episode marks a tonal shift early in the season. It's the first time Strange New Worlds fully commits to the emotional weight and social allegory that define some of the Trek's best legacy storytelling. But don't worry, it still does it with a sleek pacing and a clean mission-ready cold open. In fact, the opening few minutes are textbook Trek. We got clear mission objective, rising stakes, and a ticking clock. The Enterprise arrives at Hatmit 9 to investigate a long-abandoned Illyrian colony. An ion storm is rapidly approaching, threatening to trap the crew. And before the opening credits even roll, we got Pike and Spock stranded on the surface, Hammer showing off his transporter skills to get the rest of the team to safety, and a lingering mystery about what happened to the colonists. That's a chef's kiss setup. It's straight out of the TNG or TOS playbook. But while the plot hums along, make no mistake, this is Una Chin Riley's episode. It's framed through her perspective. He was driven by her decision, and it peels back layers we didn't even know she was hiding. Now, Rebecca Romijn steps fully into the spotlight here, and the show gives her the space to navigate fear, guilt, and ultimately courage. What makes it even more impressive is that Ghosts of Illyria doesn't forget the rest of the crew. We also get a very strong forward movement in the budding camaraderie between Pike and Spock, quiet yet vital development in M'Benga's story, and a powerful moment of tension and growth between Una and La'an. It's a character work through and through, with every plot point. Reinforcing relationship dynamics we'll continue to see evolve across the season. Thematically, this is where Strange New Worlds start playing with the heavier tools in its moral toolkit. The story explores Starfleet's ban on genetic modification, not as a one-note villainous act, but rather as a well-intentioned policy that is rooted in pain and fear. When institutions try to shield themselves from repeating history, they can actually end up punishing those who had nothing to do with it. And look, that's a very human instinct, to protect ourselves by overcorrecting. But just because something once caused harm doesn't mean it always will. This episode shows how those blind spots can unintentionally punish people who had nothing to do with the original sin. And instead of pointing fingers, the story simply lets us sit with that. The story trusts us to feel the discomfort without hammering it in. That's subtle storytelling. And in a world that's increasingly polarized and everything is seen through the prism of my team versus your team, it's refreshing to spend time in a universe that says, let's just tell a good story and let you think about it after. That's subtle, that's smart, that's Trek. Now, while Pike and Spock are stranded on a planet's surface, another mystery begins unfolding aboard the Enterprise. A strange affliction spreads rapidly through the crew. An overwhelming craving for light, so intense it leads to skin burns, irrational behavior, and a compulsive exposure to dangerous sources. It's creepy, it's intense, and it kicks off a chain of escalating tension that's part science mystery, part psychological unraveling. As viewers, we are kept just enough in the dark to feel uneasy. When everyone else starts falling ill and Una remains unaffected, suspicion doesn't come from the crew, it comes from us. Up until that point, we assumed she's fully human. After all, this is a prequel to the original series. Why would we think otherwise? But then there's a way her skin glows as she fights off the infection, like it's burning from the inside out. That visual, hot lava-like energy under the skin, mirrors the look of the ghosts on the surface. On the first viewing, it just seems like a striking bit of FX. But on a rewatch, it's a clue, hiding in the plain sight. Her immune system is literally incinerating the virus, and visually it ties her to something other. Something Illyria. It's kind of visual storytelling that's quiet, layered, intentional, that gives the episode extra rewatch value. The script trusts us to notice it, eventually. Meanwhile, sickbay has its own secrets. M'Benga's increasingly cagey behavior, particularly around the transporter systems, sets up a quieter but equally emotional subplot. We learn that he's keeping his daughter in the transporter buffer, protecting her from a fatal illness until a cure can be found. If that sounds familiar, the part about transporter buffer, it's kind of a subtle callback to TNG's Relics, where Scotty survived for decades in the pattern buffer. The emotional stakes are obviously different, but the tech is the same, and that link across series kind of adds an extra layer of poignancy. And on the surface of the planet, Pike and Spock are holding their own in a howling iron storm, surrounded by flickering, fiery, glowing forms that kind of resemble some really scary ghosts. The imagery leans eerie, even spooky, like an accidental Halloween episode in the middle of May. There's a quiet sense of dread in the way those figures appear and vanish in bursts of firelight. They don't speak, they scream. They don't threaten, but their presence adds weight to the question at the heart of the mission. What really happened to these Illyrian colonists? This episode walks a careful line between suspenseful sci-fi and meaningful social allegory. Structurally, it echoes The Naked Time and The Naked Now episode, where a strange affliction strips down inhibition and throws the crew into emotional chaos. But here, the formula evolves. Instead of leaning into comedy or shock value, this episode uses the infection as a narrative device to unearth buried identity conflicts. It's not a gimmick, it's a scalpel. Romijn's performance is a standout. She's always brought command presence to number one, but here she's asked to strip that away, to show her fear, shame, and ultimately a hard-won resolve. When she sits down with La'an, we see not just a philosophical debate about genetics. We see a deeply personal fracture between two people who genuinely care about each other. Because at the heart of this episode, the real conflict is not between Una and Starfleet. It's between Una and La'an. And that dynamic, it really hits. This is the episode we finally see their relationship as more than just professional. There's a sisterly bond at play here. Una as the composed, protective older sister, and La'an as the proud, prickly younger sibling whose armor is forged, unfortunately, from trauma. When La'an confronts Una in engineering after discovering the truth, she says some things that really do cross the line. They're angry, bigoted, hard to hear. But what's underneath isn't the hate, it's hurt. La'an isn't furious that Una is Illyrian. She's devastated that Una didn't trust her. That betrayal stings harder than any ideological difference. Because La'an looks up to her. We've seen that from the pilot. That look, that admiration. Una is her ideal. And when the ideal cracks, it hurts. This is the kind of subtle emotional terrain Trek doesn't always have the confidence to explore, especially in the modern era. In a lesser version of this story, Una would be angelic, pure, untouchable, framed as unequivocally right. And La'an would be cast as the small-minded villain to be overcome. But this episode doesn't fall into that trap. Instead, it gives both characters grace. Yes, La'an lashes out, but we understand why. She grew up under the crushing weight of her last name, Noonien Singh. It's a name that carries fear and stigma and relentless bullying. She's been blamed for a history she did not write. That pain doesn't justify her words, but it frames them. She's not a villain, she's a survivor. And yes, Una kept her secret. But that secrecy has a cost. There's pain in that isolation. Even surrounded by friends and comrades, she couldn't fully show who she was. Not because she didn't trust them, but because the system they all served made it unsafe to trust anyone. And it's kind of best summarized by this line she says in her log.
What if I hadn't saved all those lives? Would Captain feel the same? What would he do if I wasn't a hero? One of the good ones? When will it be enough to just be an Illyrian?
That's the ache at the center of her arc. The fear that worth is conditional. That belonging has to be earned through exceptionalism. And when the lights come back on, she doesn't feel relief. She feels the weight of what's still hidden. And another amazing line that she says in one of the closing moments.
The lights are back on, but that doesn't mean we see clearly. People are always hiding things.
Both La'an and Una are dealing with things they can't change. La'an can't rewrite her genetic legacy. Una can't undo hers either. And the beauty of this episode is that it gives them space to exist in that ambiguity without resolving it into some kind of a clean moral lesson. They're flawed, they're hurt, and they're trying. And while that emotional drama unfolds on the ship, Pike and Spock get their own moment of growth, and even a bit of a levity. Early on, Pike is visibly pacing in their makeshift shelter, and Spock, with that signature Vulcan calm, quietly suggests that pacing will not alter the situation. It's kind of Vulcan way of saying, look, you're annoying me, can you just please sit down? And it lands with a light comedic beat that doesn't break the tone. Their chemistry continues to build through small, well-placed moments like this. But then comes the classic Trek twist. At first, the fiery ghosts-like entities circling Pike and Spock appear hostile. They're sudden, dramatic, and utterly scary. Now both Pike and Spock assume danger. So do we. That's how we've been trained to watch stories. Creatures that look scary must be villains. But we were all wrong. As this episode progresses, we learn the truth. The burning ghosts aren't enemies. They are Illyrians themselves. Survivors, remnants. And the reason they were trying so desperately to reach Pike and Spock wasn't to harm them. It was to save them. It's a quiet subversion of our expectations and a reminder that fear is often just ignorance in disguise. There's also a deep irony baked into the Illyrian story. They were so eager to join the Federation that they had begun purging their own genetic modifications, desperately trying to fit in. And that effort is what doomed them. If they hadn't altered themselves, they might have survived. That's the sting of assimilation, of soft bigotry. The Federation didn't fire a weapon, they didn't declare war, but their policies, driven by fear of past trauma, pushed an entire colony of people to erase themselves for acceptance. And it cost them everything. Even that, the episode doesn't spell out. It just shows us. It's quiet, thoughtful, and honestly, in doing so, this episode is a great reminder of why Trek still matters. Ghosts of Illyria isn't just a title, it's kind of a thesis. This episode invites us to think about the invisible wounds people carry and the systems that force them to hide. For a character like Una, who's cool, competent, and commanding, the idea that she spent her entire career pretending to be something else makes every previous moment with her feel more layered in retrospect. The episode also adds some meaningful texture to Starfleet's troubled history with genetic modification. The policy itself is a relic of the eugenics war and the trauma that followed. But here, we're asked to consider its real-world consequences, not just for those who abuse science, but those who are born into it, shaped by it, and forced to carry its stigma. From DS9's Bashir to Una, Trek has often explored what happens when personal truth collides with the institutional fear. The subplot with M'Benga and the transporter buffer isn't just emotionally rich, it's kinda also a classic Trek move. Something's wrong with the transporter buffer is right up there, and with holodeck malfunctions and warp core leaks as a cornerstone of franchise storytelling. But here, it's paired with real dramatic weight. A father bending the rules of physics for the sake of love. The storyline works on its own, it's powerful, moving, even poetic. And yet, there's a storytelling wrinkle. As much as this theme of hidden truths connects Una and M'Benga's arc, the timing of his reveal feels slightly rushed, where it feels quite rushed. In a longer season, say, classic 20+ episode format, this subplot could have simmered. His evasiveness in sickbay might have built tension over several episodes before we arrived at this emotional payoff. Instead, the show delivers that punch here, alongside Una's massive confession. And it's one turn too many. Look, it's not a flaw when it comes to writing or performance, but in the compression. It's a symptom of modern TV pacing, where you only get 10 shots to fire the big bullets. Still, the story resonates and it sticks the landing. Fan responses to this episode often highlight how personal the themes feel. Sometimes the fear of not belonging doesn't stem from society at large, but from the people closest to us. Sometimes people worry if they'll see the truth and change their minds. Then maybe, even among friends, we still have to earn our place. It can be as dramatic as a hidden identity, or as small as thinking like, I talk too much, no one really likes me. That's what Trek has always done well. They take those big cosmic-sized ideas and boil them down to something fundamentally human. And then there's Spock and Pike. Their surface storyline may seem like a side quest, but it's doing a real character work. From Spock's dry logic, needling Pike's anxious pacing, to their eventual trust in one another's instinct, this episode lays the foundation for a relationship that will eventually span decades and tragedies. You can see the arc forming, and how do we get from Strange New Worlds to TOS and the Menagerie? Respect is earned, friendship is seeded, that works begins here. So when it comes to this episode, this one is going into the archive with a gold star. This episode isn't about plot twists or space battles. It's about that moral murk, identity, and the weight of survival. It definitely asks us to rethink what inclusion means in a system that claims to be enlightened. And maybe most importantly, it lets Rebecca Romijn shows us who number one really is. And in an era where Trek is constantly negotiating with how much nostalgia to invoke, this episode doesn't do just callbacks to canon, it actually builds it. But it builds it quietly, thoughtfully, and with a heart. And that's it for this episode of Strange New Worlds. Thank you for joining me on this deep space detour through Ghosts of Illyria, an episode that proves that Trek doesn't need phaser fire to land the punch. If you enjoyed this debrief, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share the pod with your fellow Starfleet fans. Comments and thoughts are always welcome. I love hearing how these stories land for you. I'll be back very soon with another episode as we continue our rewatch voyage through Strange New Worlds on the long road to Season 3. Until then, live long and prosper.